Next tonight, fat, and in particular saturated fats like butter. We Irish tend to love our butter, but after years of being warned that it could be really bad for us and our health, new thinking has emerged that says, in fact, the rush to replace fat with other options may in fact be making us all more unhealthy. So was the message that we were fed for donkey's ears wrong? Here's Ethna O'Brien.
We all love our butter, but for 30 years we were told that fat was the enemy. Eating fats like these led to heart disease and stroke.
There is something I can help?
Well, you could put a bit of butter on the spuds, Andre.
Ah.
But has it worked? Heart disease levels are down, but we are fatter than ever.
So if you're cutting out the refined carbohydrates, then certainly eating fatty foods is about as likely to make you fat as eating green vegetables is to make you green.
But we now have illustrious magazines coming out with big quantities of butter or cream on things as a kind of a taunt really to us to say, oh, well, they were all wrong. No, they weren't all wrong.
There's definitely no reason, to my mind, why we should be avoiding butter.
New thinking is emerging. It claims that demonising fat may not be the answer. A growing number of experts are saying that the rush to replace fat with convenient low-fat options has in fact made us more unhealthy. Among the many confusing messages about food and health over the years, one thing seems certain, that the fats found in dairy products such as butter and cheese were bad. But now, even this most straightforward of messages is being questioned.
One week they're telling you that fat is bad for you, another week they're telling you that sugar is bad for you.
Don't eat eggs, you know, the next time they're good for you. We get a lot of messages.
Bread especially as well, a lot of times bread gets vilified.
Times Man of the Year 1961, Ansel Keys, was the American researcher who made the link between fat and heart disease.
It strikes without warning. Of 10 men, we can expect 5 to get it. But we can't say who, or when, or why.
He noticed early on that people in the Mediterranean basin and in Japan, for example, had low heart attack death rates. So he tried to relate their diet to their actual death rate. And within those countries, he found strong relationships between what we eat and what we die from.
Keys' research led to a demonisation of fat that was to last for decades. Now experts are starting to question the evidence. A number of studies over the last 5 years say that blaming fat for our health woes was wrong. One epidemiological study by Cambridge University looked at 80 different studies and concluded that current evidence does not support low consumption of saturated fats or high consumption of polyunsaturated fats that are often considered healthy. I've come to London to meet a cardiologist who says that the advice that we've been given for the last 40 years to avoid saturated fat has in fact been detrimental to our health.
One of the most powerful messages that came out that changed dietary advice was actually promotion of a low-fat is good for you message. That has been exploited by the food industry, and in fact what's happened is you've now had a mass explosion in marketing of low-fat junk foods. Many foods that are promoted as being healthy and low-fat actually are loaded with sugar, and the increasing scientific evidence is now telling us that added sugar is actually an independent risk factor for a whole host of diseases.
Hi Darina, how are you? I'm Ethna. So what does Ireland's best-known cook and food writer think of this new evidence?
And then a nice big lump of butter melting onto the top. There are only 2 vitamins that are water soluble, and that's C and the B vitamins. The rest are all fat soluble. One of the first things I say to the students on the very first day is, look, we use butter, we use olive oil, of course, and we use cream and so on. We use absolutely no low-fat products, and that is because I'm passionately interested in healthy, wholesome food.
For Darina, the news that saturated fats may not be so bad after all has just confirmed her long-held beliefs.
I was astonished at how quickly everybody seemed to get brainwashed into thinking that fat was public enemy number 1. And you know, it was so funny when I was doing the Simply Delicious programmes, I got lots of irate letters from viewers who were saying, don't you have any sense of responsibility? Don't you realise that low fat is much better for us, that you shouldn't be using butter and cream and so on? And I thought, Well, anyway, at this stage, it's not a question of I told you so, but really I feel very, very relieved.
The rush to eat a low-fat diet has resulted in the consumption of more processed foods high in sugar.
Many of these foods that are marketed as low-fat actually can have the opposite effect on your health because they're loaded with lots of sugar. There are some items out there, low-fat yogurts, for example, cereals that have 6 or 7 teaspoons of sugar in one serving, which is already over the World Health Organization limit recommendation for adults. So I think what we need to do, instead of buying low-fat junk food, is just eat real food.
Daniel Davey is a performance nutritionist and Gaelic footballer with Ballyboden St Enda's in Dublin.
Low-fat foods are a perfect example of a food that was pushed on us, and that was, when we walked into a shop, everything was labelled low-fat, and that was the thing that we should be eating. And yeah, they contain sweeteners, they contain sugars, and they're the foods that are now being linked to a greater extent than fat itself to lifestyle-related diseases like type 2 diabetes.
For him and his fellow players, it's not fats they are worried about, but carbohydrates and sugar.
Nowadays, people are becoming a lot more aware of what carbs can do to you. People are a bit concerned with fats, but now people are a lot more concerned with their carb intake.
In the last year, I would have been trying to get the optimum performance. I was trying to lose a bit of body fat or something. Like a non-training day, so I might need carbs. But bar that, I'd be eating as much good stuff, what I think is good for me, as I can.
It's only since I've been kind of informed about eating good fats, and realising that often when something is low fat, it's often replaced with sugar. But definitely trying to avoid processed carbohydrates and processed fats, and trying to eat whole kind of natural food.
And while there is division as to whether fat is bad for us, there is growing consensus that the rush to replace fat with processed food does not benefit our health.
It would be easy to get a guilt complex about eating and to be very confused. I suppose there's no such thing as a villain. All foods have their place. We need fat in our diet. We need some carbohydrates in our diet as well, particularly unrefined carbohydrates. It's just that at the moment we're eating too much, and we're also eating too much of this highly palatable processed food, which is very high in fat, sugar and salt. So what we need to do is redress the balance, increase the amount of vegetables and fruit and fish in our diet.
And it's the message of balance that experts come back to again and again.
There's no such thing as a bad food, it's the balance that matters. And that's led us to look more at the Mediterranean diet and 2 very major trials that have shown a benefit from the Mediterranean diet, so that we focus much more on positive choices nowadays. So particularly we say, well, think more about foods of vegetable origin, which would mean fruit, vegetables, legumes as we call them, fibre, that kind of thing, and a little bit less about animal sources of food. That's not to ban meat, but modest amounts of lean meat and plenty of fish.
So after years of being told to eat low-fat spreads, is it safe to eat butter again?
Well, it's all a matter of amount. If you like butter, why not? Just use it very sparingly.
There's at least 6 times as much saturated fat in butter as there is in the average spread. So you are making a conscious decision there of your saturated fat intake. You're going to take a good bit of it in butter.
One of the things that I wouldn't recommend is that people should use this as an excuse to go and gorge on lots of butter and lots of fat in general, but actually just think about what they're eating. I mean, the evidence is very clear that food can be the most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison.
The people of the Mediterranean, their fat is olive oil. Our fat was the fat of our land, was butter. And it's what all of our ancestors lived on and what we're conditioned to thrive on, really. And not too much of anything, that's the other thing. Too much of anything is bad for you.